This is the village my grandfather grew up in. It's named Jangaon and is in the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh, which in Hindi means the upper province. The village is about an hour and a half by car from the city of Lucknow, which is the capital of Uttar Pradesh. Roughly 5,000 people live in Jangaon, and most are pretty poor, at least by our standards. The Tripathi family, my family, can be traced back more than 400 years in the village. My great-grandfather was a large landowner and owned the land of the village and several nearby villages, which meant that under British rule he was considered a leader in the village. Through India's independence, most of the land had to be sold off, and my grandfather has kept selling off more, but he is still considered a leader in the village. In this patriarchal rural society, that role passes from father to son, as it did from my great-grandfather to my grandfather, and as it would have to my father and even me, but thankfully the feudal Indian society, which still exists in rural India, is beginning to change. My mom and I traveled to India this past February to make a documentary on the village and my grandfather's relationship to it. We wanted to learn about the people my grandfather has remained close to and what he really means to them and to the village. Having only been to the village once before, about 10 years ago, I assumed the trip would be like going to a totally foreign land, but in many ways I couldn't have been more wrong. We were welcomed from the start and made to feel like we belonged. The kids were by far the first that I felt comfortable with. Immediately, I connected with them through the camera. They were happy to be my subjects and models, and even happier to see themselves on camera afterward. I spent at least half of my time in the village with the kids. Often, I would just walk around with a camera, and they would all flock around me. I got many portraits of the kids and group photos, but the hardest shots to get, of course, were the ones that looked natural. Most of the kids had little to no experience with cameras before, because they were so poor. The technology we brought with us was like magic to many of the kids, although I did see one of them with an iPod once. With the older boys, I got to know them in a different way. We were slower to get to know each other than it was with the little kids, but through games we overcame any shyness. Of course, we played cricket, but the game we played most was one called Kabaddi. It is difficult to explain, but basically it is team tag that involves wrestling and holding your breath. Much more fun than regular tag, although we did have a few casualties, including a few skinned knees and ripped shirts. There was one boy, Sonu, who was by far the most eager kid to get to know us. By the third day, he was my self-appointed caretaker, assistant, guide, translator, even though he didn't speak English, and, as he called me, brother. Sonu was very curious, always asking to see the camera or listen to my iPod. Quickly, I became friends with Sonu and many of the other kids. Through the kids, I learned about the village. They taught me some Hindi, I can now say almost every body part, and showed me around. Eventually, I got to know the village and many of the people, although there was still the barrier of language. The camera made it much easier to learn about the village, giving me a purpose and a shield. But it did nothing to help when an old man walked up to me and started babbling fervently. At times like that, when I was alone with only non-English speakers, I resolved to learn Hindi. Ever since, I have been learning. Next time we go back, I plan to be able to speak with anyone and everyone in the village. It's amazing how at home and comfortable we felt there, even though we couldn't speak to most people. Looking back, though, it does seem like an entirely foreign world. What I really gained from this trip was a sense of how important it is that the village remain a part of my life. With the older people, I could feel their expectation at who I should be, being my grandfather's grandson. From the rest of the village, I just felt their joy at us coming back, because Chachi, my great-grandmother who had been a leader after my great-grandfather died, passed 10 years ago. The family coming back is an event for many people in the village, and it makes them quite happy. But we have even stronger ties than just through the family. 5 years ago, my grandfather built a school in the village, which he has funded entirely out of pocket. He knew that while the boys in the village were being sent to schools in other villages, because there wasn't one in the village, the girls were not. Their parents would not let them go that far. He originally built the school for girls, but now it is open for both boys and girls. The school does have many issues, funding being one of them. There is a small tuition fee because, as my grandfather says, no one appreciates anything that is free, but it is not large enough to actually help fund the school. My grandfather is determined to help provide the children of the village with a good education. He hopes to expand the current school to include higher grades and someday wants to build a vocational school. Through this tie, we are connected very solidly to the village and plan on continuing with the school. Realistically, my grandfather will not be able to keep going back to the village every year as he does now, so hopefully we will be able to do that for him. The thought that we would be coming back, for we are planning on going back next December, made saying goodbye much easier, although it was still very hard. The ceremony that occurred when we left was very telling of the whole trip and the village itself. We were cared for, and through their ritualistic ceremony, they blessed us and wished us safe travel and good health. Part of the ceremony included giving us money. I knew that this was coming, but it still made me sad. Not that it was very much money, but any amount of money is worth a lot more to the people in the village than it is to me. The scariest thing about leaving and coming home was just how quickly I adjusted and just how fast the village slips from my mind. I'm really glad to be doing this project because it allows me to remain focused on the village. I always carry around my rupees from the trip in my wallet so that I can never forget that halfway around the world in the middle of nowhere, I mean a lot to many people and they mean a lot to me too, and I hope to be able to help improve their hard lives.